All right, well, welcome everybody to today's thesis defense. Today, Lou, we're happy and excited to be present for her thesis talk today. I know when Lou started and joined the lab, I think back in fall 2016, at the time we had made a lot of progress on large scale kind of SLAM mapping of environments, but no real representation of really understanding any of the contextual or kind of semantic information in the environment. You know, the maps that we produced were really just kind of geometric in representation. And so when Lou joined the lab, that was the charge that we gave to her, was that someday we wanted to see, you know, robots like Cassie be able to kind of run through the forest and be able to disambiguate between, like, you know, running through tall grass versus, you know, kind of hard obstacles and things like that. And so Lou's taken this problem or this challenge kind of head on, and I think made a lot of progress here in really kind of bring that semantic component now to our map representation. And so with that, let me turn it over to Lou and to have you take us through your thesis defense.
Okay, thank you, Ryan, and thank everyone for coming to my dissertation defense. Today I'm gonna defend my thesis work, Semantic-Aware Robotic Mapping in Unknown Loosely Structured Environments. So in the last decades, the robotics community has made tremendous progress in robotic perception. Specifically for simultaneous localization and mapping, SLAM, we have mature feature-based SLAM software, such as OpSLAM, that can run in real time and build sparse metric maps of the environment. We can also build a nice semi-dense metric map by using a good implementation of direct visual odometry or direct SLAM algorithm. Besides those metric maps, semantic fusion is able to add meanings to the map elements and build a room-size semantic map. In the meantime, however, we have to realize and admit that there are still a huge gap from the robotic perception to human level perception. So human perception is far more than knowing the geometry of the world. Instead, we have a much higher level understanding of the environment. This is an image of a post-disaster scene of Wenchuan earthquake in 2008. The human rescue operators were able to quickly understand the different objects in this super clustered and unstructured environment, such as the building, the wood, the concrete, and search for survivors among those objects. They can also reason about which spot might be unsafe to step on by observing the physics and the relations among objects. The works I have done in my PhD are therefore to make this perception gap smaller by allowing the robot to have a high-level understanding of its surroundings. So the reasons why we care about high-level understanding for robotic systems are twofold. Firstly, the high-level understanding is a key to robot interaction. To enable the robot to interact with the environment, the object, and interact with human, such as clean the floor, grab a cup of water from the kitchen, or deliver a package, it needs to have some kinds of high-level understanding of the scene. For delivery robot safely operating in real world, for example, we want the robot to walk along the sidewalk instead of any arbitrary path. And I will address this problem later in my work. On the other hand, the high-level understanding is also a key to robust perception. This is a very common thing in the forest. As a human, we can follow the trail very easily without thinking. However, for a robot, with only geometric information, it cannot know the high grass will be more walkable than the fallen branches. But also with only semantic information, it doesn't know there might be some fallen branches under some grass. So the robust perception relies on simultaneously understanding of geometry, semantics, physics, and affordances, which is a traversability for legged robot. And we approach this by building a multi-layer map to provide the robot richer information of the environment. So why this is a hard problem to enable the robot have a high level understanding? So this is because the robotic systems are constrained by a lot of factors, such as the price, size, and safety to be truly useful for real-world applications. Thus, they have constrained computation capability, power usage, and they need interpretability for humans to understand and trust. So having those constraints in mind, I have done 3 works toward the robot high-level thing understanding in this dissertation. The first one is a Bayesian kernel inference dense semantic mapping, which goes from geometric mapping, especially occupancy grid mapping, to continuous dense semantic mapping. The second one is multitask multi-layer Bayesian mapping, which jointly and efficiently model different environment properties to provide the robot even richer information. And as an example, we built a 2-layer map consisting of semantic and traversability layers. So this traversability layer, however, this traversability layer is only robot agnostic. So in order to model the robot-specific traversability cost, in the last chapter, we tackle a problem of terrain traversability modeling using inverse reinforcement learning to learn from the demonstration. We first talk about the Bayesian kernel inference dense semantic mapping. The recent works on semantic mapping, we have well-known systems such as SLAM++ that can build an object map of the indoor environment. However, it needs a pre-built object database. We also have semantic fusion system that can build a semantic circle map in a room-sized environment. However, the semantic information here is only incorporated by a simple label averaging. And more recently, a grid system, Chimera, is able to build a scene graph at the scale of a building, but it needs more than 30 minutes offline computation using GPUs. So those systems lead to 3 problems. The first one is representation. The semantic labels we built in the map are ideally generalizable to some unseen objects. And the second problem is the inference. We want to have a better inference method than just a simple label averaging. And the last problem is the efficiency. Instead of build the map, instead of having a pre-built map, we want to build the semantic map efficiently online and on board on the robot. So some preliminaries on Bayesian inference and conjugacy. So Bayesian inference is a statistical model that uses Bayes' rule to update the probability for a hypothesis. So given some data D and a hypothesis theta, the posterior distribution of the theta given D, which is the estimate of theta, is proportional to a product of the prior probability and the likelihood function. So the intuition here is the posterior will shift from the prior towards the likelihood with a decreased uncertainty. And the concept of conjugacy is that the posterior actually follows the same distribution family as the prior. For instance, the theta follows the distribution A, and the theta given D will also follow the same distribution, but with different parameters. Our work is inspired by a simple method on occupancy grid mapping, which is called counting sensor model. So here the theta denotes the probability of a grid cell being occupied, and it is unknown in this problem. And we have the noisy measurement of that cell being occupied. We denote as Y, which is the noisy observation we can generate from the LiDAR or depth sensor. If we model the data likelihood using a Bernoulli distribution of theta and place a prior distribution of theta as a beta distribution, the posterior distribution here will also be beta. And the shape parameters alpha and beta will be updated by just counting the measurements inside the cell. So that's why it's called the counting sensor model. And here is a simulation example for the distribution of an occupied cell and an occupied cell. So for the two cells, we generate we're sampling from the ground truth occupancy probability as measurements. And we place a beta prior distribution with the PDF concentrating on 0 and 1. As you can see, when the model integrates more and more measurements, the beta posterior distribution is gradually shifting to the correct estimate. And the uncertainty of the estimate is decreasing. So we show this by incorporating one measurement at a time, but in real application, the computation can be done very efficiently in batch. And inspired by this, this simple occupancy mapping model, we propose a semantic accounting sensor model for semantic mapping, which is a natural extension of previous methods. So the idea is we think of a cell being occupied as being occupied by a specific semantic class K with a probability of theta K. Then our modeling choices are thus naturally categorical likelihood function and de-Richter prior distribution, where the K is the total number of semantic classes. So because we add the conjugacy here, the posterior distribution will also be a de-Richter distribution, and the concentration parameter alpha can be computed efficiently in a closed form by using the similar counting model. We also visualize this for a cell. So this cell has a ground truth probability of 0.2 as being free, and probability of 0.1 belongs to a floor, and 0.7 it is a all. As we don't have any prior information before observing this cell, we place a de-Richter prior distribution with a uniform concentration parameter. We can see how the PDF of this de-Richter distribution and the uncertainty is changing with more and more measurements, and the estimated semantic probability is getting more and more accurate. So another contribution of this work is continuous semantic mapping. A limitation of the semantic counting sensor model and most grid mapping works is the independent grid assumption, which means that the estimation of that cell only uses the measurements belongs to that cell. So we extend the semantic accounting sensor model using Bayesian generalized kernel inference. For an arbitrary location X, we can infer the posterior using the likelihood of other points around X by taking an exponential of the kernel function. And by using this Bayesian generalized kernel inference, we can firstly query the semantics of continuous location in the environment instead of the discretized cell-centric. Secondly, we can build a semantic map in any resolution or even with varying resolutions. Here are the experimental results on KT odometry dataset. So we use an image segmentation neural network to get the noisy semantic measurements of stereo point cloud. And we build a semantic map using these measurements. We compare our method with a state-of-the-art semantic mapping work on the same dataset. And by projecting semantic map into image plane and computing the intersection of a union for each semantic class. We also compare with a method which models the occupancy and the semantics individually. And our method achieves the best performance. Also in the quantitative results, we can see that our continuous semantic map is much denser than the map built by other methods. some qualitative results on the Semantic-Aware dataset using a LiDAR point cloud segmentation neural network for generating the semantic measurements. This is a quantitative results on Semantic-Aware dataset. We submit our results to the dataset server for evaluation, and our method is able to outperform the state-of-the-art deep learning method by 18 out of 19 static classes on test sequences. Besides the public available dataset, we also evaluate this mapping method in a real robot. We built a customized torso on our bipedal robot Cassie with a RealSense camera, a Velodyne LiDAR, and a NVIDIA Jetson computer. So we run the state estimation, mapping, control, and planning modules in different computers and communicate with each other. In this experiment, our semantic mapping is able to run at 1.5 Hertz on board, and we convert this semantic map to custom map for planning. The first experiment we did is for obstacle avoidance. And we use a stereo camera to do this. We place some obstacles like bicycles along the sidewalk and detect that in the semantic map as obstacles. So Cassie is able to autonomously walk forward and adjust its trajectory to avoid those obstacles. So because the point cloud in this experiment is from the stereo camera, so the map looks a bit noisy. In the second experiment, we use LiDAR point cloud to build the semantic map. So we still do the semantic segmentation on images, but we transfer the image semantic label from the camera to the LiDAR point cloud. We built a semantic map on board, and we convert the sidewalk class to the walkable areas for autonomous navigation. So due to the computation burden, we choose a lightweighted semantic segmentation neural network. So you can see the segmentation results here is actually very noisy, but after the mapping inference, the map looks much cleaner. And in this field experiment, Cassie was able to autonomously walk the whole loop of the wave field on North Campus, which including like 200 meters. So the contributions of this work is we properly and efficiently model the occupancy and semantics in a single probabilistic model. And another contribution is continuous dense semantic mapping using the Bayesian kernel inference. The meaning of this work is it enables the semantic-aware robot navigation in real time. So the next chapter, we go from the semantic mapping to multi-layer mapping in order to provide the robot richer information besides the semantics. The contribution in this work is a novel and extendable mapping framework to jointly and efficiently model different information environment. And specifically, we built 2-layer maps of semantics and traversability as example. The front end of this framework is a multitask learning deep neural network, which reduces the computation burden of having different networks to infer different environmental properties. And the backend of this framework is a multi-layer Bayesian inference algorithm, which has closed form and can leverage interlayer correlations. So this is a architecture of the multitask learning neural network. It has a task-specific decoder for each task and a shared encoder. In the shared encoder, we also implemented the task-specific attention modules to alleviate the negative transfer issue and to modulate the task-specific feature learning. In order to train this multitask neural network, we use human annotated semantic ground truth label. And we also propose a self-supervised method to generate the image traversability labels. This is the framework of how we generate the traversability label in a self-supervised way. So we use the measurements from a depth sensor and the sensor trajectory, firstly to build an elevation map. The elevation map is a 2.5D map. In each grade, it has a height value for that cell. And after that, we compute the local geometric information from this elevation map, which is the roughness and the height and the slope of the local areas for each cell. And we compare this with robot capability. We can generate a geometric traversability map. In each cell, it has a traversability score. We project this traversability score into the image plane to label the images. However, due to the noisy depth measurement and the elevation estimation error, we notice that the projected traversability score is noisy. As you can see, some pixels in the sky area is labeled as traversable. Therefore, we further leverage the semantic segmentation results to mask this traversability score in the image. And we are able to get a cleaner traversability ground truth label to train the multitask neural network. And the backend of this framework is a multi-layer Bayesian mapping inference algorithm, which can leverage interlayer correlations. So specifically, we use the correspondences between some semantic class to traversability and the semantic posterior to improve the traversability inference performance. So for example, after the semantic map inference, we have a semantic posterior alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, which alpha 1 is a parameter for the semantic class road. And as we know, like some semantic classes, such as road, is traversable for a leggy robot. And some of the semantic classes, such as building and human, will definitely be unwalkable for the robot. So based on those information, we can convert this to a beta prior. And we can sample from the corresponding balloon distribution to generate some semantic traversability measurement. Here we denote that by Y. And at the meantime, we have some traversability measurement directly from the multitask learning neural network, Z here. And by using the Bayesian inference, and by using the Bayes rule, the traversability posterior is able to compute it by using both measurement. And later in the experiment, we can show the semantic inference can actually improve the traversability inference performance. Here is the experimental results on a dataset called Titan Air. And the first row shows the semantic map, the traversability map, which built only using the noise measurement from the neural network. And the third one is the traversability map built using both measurement. One is from the neural network and another is from the semantic posterior. And the bottom row is the corresponding uncertainty for those map cells. And also based on the quantitative results, we can see by incorporating semantic posterior distribution, we can actually improve the traversability inference. And also the uncertainty is decreased. And in the bottom table, we show our multitask learning performance multitask network has better segmentation performance in both tasks compared with training the same network architecture individually for each task. Here is the visualization shows how the pipeline of building the traversability labeling. So we use the LiDAR point cloud and the robot state to build the elevation map here, and then we compute the geometric scores for each cell. We can get a traversability score for each cell, and we project this into the image plane. Then we use that to train the multitask neural network. And this is the this is the result of our multi-Bayesian map inference. So the actual representation is for each cell, we actually have two sets of probabilities. One is for semantic class, another one is for the traversability. Just for visualization, we show this as two different layers. The contributions for this chapter is an extendable mapping framework that models richer information for the environment, and self-supervised traversability labeling, as well as a multitask learning neural network. And the meaning of this chapter is it enables higher level thing understanding, including semantics and traversability. So next chapter is terrain traversability modeling using inverse reinforcement learning, which will go from the robot agnostic traversability to a more robot specific traversability. So terrain traversability modeling and end-to-end learning are two main types of methods for robot autonomous navigation, especially for unstructured environments. Compared with the end-to-end learning methods, terrain traversability modeling and plan with those information has a better generalization ability and interpretability. We also plot the coordinates for common terrain traversability modeling methods here. Some works formulate this problem as a terrain type classification, and it belongs to the semantic-based methods. And other works usually regress on some geometric-based or proprioceptive matrix. For example, a recent work Where Should I Walk defines a ground reaction score from the Lego robot force torque signals and use this score to label corresponding images for traversability regression. And similarly, other works define maximum forward velocity, active stability, or the vibration as the traversability cost for mobile or leggy robots. However, this matrix will only capture like one aspect or some parts of the actual traversability. Motivated by the limitation of using hand-designed matrix to define traversability cost, we want to learn it from demonstration and using our inverse reinforcement learning method. Therefore, we formulate the problem of terrain traversability modeling as an inverse reinforcement learning problem. So this is a problem statement. We model the process of a leggy robot walking in a local area as an agent following a Markov decision process M, which consists of a set of state A's, action A, and the transition probability T, a discount factor gamma, and a reward function R. And a trajectory here is defined as a sequence of state action pairs followed by the agent. A demonstration D is defined as a set of trajectories under a specific policy pi, which is a map from the state space to the action space. And specifically in our implementation, the state is the current 2D position of a robot in a local scene map. As shown, for example, this is a current robot state. And the actions of a robot are simplified to be walking toward 8 discretized directions from the current state. In the right figure shows an example of the demonstrated trajectory, where the red denotes the past trajectory and the sign denotes the future trajectory. The forward reinforcement learning problem is giving an MDP and try to find the optimal policy which maximizes the return. And in the inverse reinforcement learning problems, it's giving the MDP excluding the reward function. And some demonstration behaviors, they try to recover the underlying reward function, which explains the demonstration. And in our work, we define the traversability cost of each state as the negative of the reward. So to solve this problem, we follow the maximum entropy deep inverse reinforcement learning formulation by treating the trajectories with higher rewards as exponentially more likely. And in this framework, the reward function is approximated by using a neural network. So here, the reward of each state S is a function of the feature of that state, phi S here, and the network parameter theta. Also, from this nerd reward function, we can solve a forward reinforcement learning problem and have the optimal policy under the nerd reward. And from this optimal policy, we can further compute the expected state visitation frequency for each state. Here denoted as the expectation of mu. And the mu D refers to the mean state visitation frequencies computed from the demonstration trajectories. So the equation given in the right defines the maximum entropy deep inverse reinforcement learning gradient with respect to the network parameter theta. And the reward network is trained by backpropagating this gradient in each iteration. So in the reward learning network, the input to the network are some feature maps, phi S, which are usually some environmental feature built using exteroceptive sensors. For example, the height map, the height variance, the occupancy, or the color information. However, those environmental features do not have any information about the robot itself. So to make the reward learning more accurate, the researchers started to investigate it into integrating robot states as the input features to this network. For example, recent works are using some handcrafted kinematics features. For example, the average X and Y velocities in the trajectory, and also the trajectory curvature. And also more recently, people are using directly use the past trajectory as a feature map, or a past trajectory and a planned trajectory using some planning method as a feature map. So instead of using this handcrafted kinematics or initial features, we propose to learn the initial features directly from the raw sensory measurements in a single deep neural network. So for us, this way have the environmental features phi ES, and we also have the initial feature phi IS, but this initial feature is also depend on the network parameter theta. So we design our reward learning network as follows. A branch of 1D convolution layer and a fully connected layer is designed to process the raw MU data collected from the robot as part of the demonstrations. And the nerd initial features are concatenated with the environmental feature in the middle stage. And a final feature fusion block fuses both features to predict the final reward map. To evaluate the performance of reward learning in this maximum deep IRL framework, we collected demonstration data by human operating a Mini-Cheetah robot in a campus environment, which includes the on-road and off-road scenes. So the Mini-Cheetah robot is mounted with a customized sensor suite, which consists of an interior sense depth camera, an IMU, and a NVIDIA Jetson computer. We generate a dataset with more than 1,000 samples of different things. Each sample including an elevation map, the elevation variance of each state, and the mean RGB color information, as well as the IMU signals during the past 0.5 seconds. And also we record the past and future trajectories in this space. So this is the experimental results of our proposed reward learning network. We compare it with a baseline using the handcrafted kinematics features, and also our network without the initial feature learning. The right figure shows the qualitative results of all three methods, as well as the ground truth future trajectory. The first three columns are the reward map learned by these three methods. And the middle three columns are the expected state visitation frequency computed from those learned reward map, and which can be seen as like a probabilistic future trajectories. So from this result, we can see that our method incorporating the learned inertial feature is able to predict future trajectories closer to a ground truth future trajectory in the demonstration. And which means that the reward map learned by our method explains the demonstration behaviors better. This is also shown in the quantitative results using NLL and HD matrix. The NLL is the negative log likelihood of the demonstration under the nerd policy. And the hot stop distance is a geometric distance between the demonstrations and the trajectories sampled with the nerd policy. So our method achieves the best results among those three methods. Another contribution of the work is local motion energy ranked reward regulation technique. So most inverse reinforcement learning methods fundamentally just seek a reward function that justifies the demonstration, which means to make the demonstration optimal. However, we think for the legal robot, the demonstrations might not be optimal or even suboptimal because the expert lacks the feedback from the robot during the data collection. So some works deal with the suboptimality by formulating the inverse reinforcement learning problem as a classification problem using a pairwise ranking constraints between the trajectories. So by knowing which trajectory is better than another, the algorithm is able to extrapolate the reward learning and learn a reward and policy better than the demonstration. And inspired by these works, we propose to rank the demonstrated trajectories by average energy consumption along each trajectory. And we expect the trajectory with lower average energy consumption, which will have a higher return from the learned reward. So this objective leads to a trajectory ranking loss, which we will try to minimize during the network training. And after adding this reward regulation strategy, we expect the reward function will encode the robot energy consumption information and can lead to a more energy efficient policy than the demonstration, instead of just explain the demonstration. Therefore, in our network training process, at each interaction, at each iteration, we randomly choose 2 batches of training data. First, we compute the maximum entropy DIRL gradient for each batch of data. And also we can compute a trajectory rank loss based on the ranks of those two batches comparison. And during the training, we back propagate all the gradients together. In the experiment, we compare our method trajectory rank maximum entropy DIRL with the original maximum entropy DIRL method. So besides using the matrix of NLL and HD, we also compare the trajectory pairwise classification accuracy on the test set and another metric of average energy consumption. So to compute the average energy consumption matrix, we generate the optimal trajectories from the reward learned by both methods on the test set. And we simulate the Mini-Cheetah robot in a simulator to follow these optimal trajectories on the corresponding head maps. And then we record the joint torque information to compute the average energy consumption for all the trajectories. And the quantitative results shows that indeed our method has slightly lower performance in explaining the demonstrations, but it leads to more energy efficient policy with lower average energy consumption. And this is a visualization of how we compute this matrix for each method. So we generate the optimal trajectory from the reward map learned using both methods. And we input the corresponding head map into the Mini-Cheetah simulator. We also implement trajectory following in the simulator. The robot is able to follow this optimal trajectory. And the joint information is recorded and we can compute the average energy consumption and to get the final result. And you can see those two trajectories sometimes have the different paths or even different goals. And the contribution of this chapter is we incorporate the robot inertial states in reward function learning. And also we propose an energy-based trajectory ranking reward regulation technique. The meaning of this chapter is it enables the robot-specific traversability and energy-efficient planning. Those are some publications during my PhD. And most of the code is available in the GitHub repository. So going back to the forest scene shown in the introduction, my works have firstly enabled the robot to use the semantic information for navigation. And it also provides a 3D traversability map of the scene, as well as a local robot-specific terrain traversability cost. Therefore, I believe that the robot now will be at a better place to successfully follow the complex trail. However, my contribution is just a step toward the human level perception, and more future efforts are needed. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about future research direction and challenges. So the plot shows different axes of difficulties in robot navigation and mapping. To the right, we have a variety of representations, such as we have metric map and topological map. We have dense semantic map and absolute map. So choosing a representation or developing a new representation suitable for a specific application is a critical problem. And also the inference, also semantic mapping, also the robotic mapping is a very difficult inference problem. The wrong measurements obtained from neural networks will be propagated into the following modules. For example, we notice the segmentation failure for the semantic mapping. Therefore, we need framework which can perform joint inference over the different information, such as pose, geometry, shapes, and semantics. And also implement the systems and make it autonomously. It's also a very difficult systematic problem for robotics. And some future works I want to investigate it is, firstly, is a more compact and scalable map representation. With richer and richer environmental information being modeled, the robotic map becomes larger and larger and needs a lot of storage. So the following work proposed a point cloud map compression method with the goal to maintain a good relocalization performance. And I want to further study on designing efficient compression algorithm for other map representations with a minimum accuracy drop. For instance, how to discarding the less informative parts of the map. And another future work is hybrid planning with heterogeneous maps. So planning is a bridge to close the loop of sensing and acting. In our works, we have built global dense multi-layer maps with semantic and traversability. We also have the robot-specific local terrain traversability caused from a learning method. So in the future, I want to investigate how to combine those heterogeneous maps for hybrid planning. A very recent work has done some preliminary research on this topic, which combines the geometrical cost maps and the learned cost using a weighted sum for planning. But I think more exciting works could be done in this direction. And finally, I would like to express my deep appreciation to my advisors, Professor Ryan Eustace, Jesse Grizzle, and Mandy Graphic. It is my greatest honor and luck to have you as my advisors. And thank you for your guidance to me, not only as a researcher, but also as a person. I also would like to thank everyone in Peril, in the Bipedal Lab and the Curly Lab. So without you, any of those works could be done. Studying abroad is very difficult, but you guys make the journey easier and happier. And finally, I would like to thank the UM Robotic Department for giving me the opportunity to pursue my dream. Thank you.